Okay, so I'm just going to present through where we currently are with the project and the changes that we've made relative to the comments that we received. I'm going to talk a little bit about the analysis of the existing layout, where the project is at the moment, a comparison of the before and after, and then touch on the project risks and the next steps. So we've received lots of comments, both with concerns and positive. The concerns are basically in terms of the main 5 points that have come across. Limited information about the proposals, the loss of parking, the loss of disabled and loading bays, location of trees, and the process and consultation. That's a bit better. And then in terms of the positive comments, great to see new public space. Moving the bus stops will help free up space. Trees, vegetation are welcome. Better use of current off-street parking, and the enhancement of the town centre is welcome. So there's been a really good mix, and it's good to hear what people think, because it helps us to actually shape the project. So just in terms of just recapping a little bit about the RRDF funding, that's why this project's happening, that the government's got money to spend on rural towns and villages, and really just to say what those criteria are. And it's all about how you actually create a better place and help businesses, upgrading of pedestrian ways. And the one in red is probably the key point, which is there's a degree, this is their comments, which they fed back to the initial bid that the council put in. And they said there's a degree of innovation with the reimagining of large spaces in the centre currently used for car parking to become a market area where people can trade and interact in an enhanced town centre with less congestion, better air quality, and safe pedestrian access. So in a way, what we're saying is that we need to be really responding to the funding requirements to be able to get the money to actually make the change. We realise there's a series of processes of planning and everything else that we have to go through, but there's a bid which is there at the moment, which to make some of these changes would have to address those. And obviously these bids are put in place, and the criteria are put in place through understanding what rural towns and villages actually need, and making sure that they function, but also trying to make them more appropriate for all ages, and that's young and old, all businesses, and trying to actually lift footfall, which they see as a main driver of improving towns and villages. And it's also worth noting that they also pointed out that they thought Pine Street, as much as the benefits there of slowing down traffic would definitely be good, but they sort of see this as probably being a different sort of funding to their funding, because their funding is all about creating public spaces and creating a better town centre. So therefore, it's a call on what goes into the actual RRDF funding, and ensuring that what we put in, actually, we really want to make sure that we get the money. So just to go through the comments raised, really one by one, and actually our response to them. So these are actual comments. I've picked half a dozen of them and answered them. So I welcome the enhancement work, but not in its current arrangement, based on the limited information provided. Yeah, we agree. This is a very early stage. It's an early stage when we first went out, and it's great to see the support for the changes. And we have taken on board people's comments. The reality is we prefer not to come with a finished scheme. We like to come with a sketch scheme and get people's comments and then build upon that. So the second comment, I'm against eliminating parking spaces. Yeah, we agree with that as well. We need to provide a good availability of parking, but that also includes cars which sit on the street all day long and actually moving them into the plots car park. We really see it's all about getting cars turning over in spaces, and not just having it's not just the amount of car parking spaces, it's the availability of car parking spaces in the town centre that will actually help the businesses. And we see that there's a big difference in that. Third one is the loading bays and disabled bays cannot be removed and seem to be excluded from the plan. Again, we completely agree, they can't be, they have to be there. They always have been there. But the feedback has now enabled us to place these better. So it's something that it's always has been in the plan, and it's all about the detail that as we move forward, we'll actually decide where they're best placed. I'm a resident and need a park in the square. So yeah, we need to look at this further to see how this can be accommodated. We're not sure how many people live in the square, but we need to look at how that can be accommodated if people are living there. Elderly, less mobile people need to be able to park close to the pharmacy bank. Yeah, we agree with that. And we've looked at this and we've incorporated more spaces in this location to facilitate that. And the last one there is I do not want a tree outside my front door, window or shop. And tree and planting opportunities do need to be looked at in detail. At the moment, we've mentioned the idea of having trees and planting, which has been widely supported. And we fully agree that the devil is in the detail, and we need to look at this in a lot more detail to actually make sure that we get it right. So a few questions that have been raised. The first one being about, because the idea is that we introduce a time-limited parking in the centre of the town, which is why we then are able to actually reduce the amount of spaces there, because we get better turnover of cars parked there. And people are asking, how would it be enforced? And this will generally be as other towns in the area. And to a degree, it is self-regulating and people respecting that. But we are looking at the other options at the moment to see how else we can actually achieve that. How about HGVs being able to navigate a mini roundabout? Yes, again, this is all part of the design process. So we have done what's called tracking to make sure that the vehicles can do all the maneuvers as best as possible. At the moment, there is quite a nice culture of large vehicles giving way to other large vehicles and also cars doing the same. And a degree of that's going to have to be maintained given the tight turning and the small streets which actually exist in the town centre. And it's also worth noting that everything we do is subject to a safety audit, which really we have to really satisfy them that we're creating a safe environment. What's been done about CCTV? So there is a parallel project which has been going on for some time. We've talked to the people that have been involved in that, and we're going to ensure that we accommodate their needs. If we can future-proof something, we will do. But it's really good that there is a project there, and we'll be looking to do everything to make sure that it can happen. And can the plans be made available for local people who don't use the internet? Yes, definitely. And we're probably thinking that just given that we're in the COVID times, making it difficult to actually give elements, give stuff out, give leaflets and plans. But as part of the Part A process, that is what we're intending to do. So the existing layout, just to show you exactly what's there, and what we've done is take the liberty of putting in a boundary so we can compare like for like. So the yellow boundary is the area which we're actually looking at, and we're comparing what's in there. So currently there are 82 existing parking bays, 2 disabled parking bays and 2 loading bays. It's worth saying that with the proximity of where cars are parked to crossings, to having cars parked in bus stops and loading bays, actually within the actual junctions, if a safety auditor was to review that today, they wouldn't let you build it. So what we've got to do is try to take that and actually produce something which is actually suitable for today's standards. So yes, that is what's there. Now that we're changing it, we're having to make sure that it is safe and make sure that it still functions as best as possible. So this the revised scheme that we're looking at, and well, this is actually now been drawn with some accuracy. It's looking at 41 proposed parking bays, 2 disabled bays and 2 loading bays. Where the disabled bays and loading bays go is still something which we can look at in a little bit more detail. But it's just worth saying that we're maintaining along Main Street parallel parking on both sides. So we've taken out the 60-degree parking and made it parallel, which is viewed to be safer for all users, including cyclists, and backing out onto the main road is deemed not to be something that we want to continue with. Likewise, exactly the same arrangement along Barrack Street, where we've got lined up basically the complete line of parking down both sides of the road, and we've now got a few extra spaces, including a loading bay, as you move up towards Pine Street, which is where a lot of the comments were that they wanted something in the proximity of the pharmacy and the bank. So this is basically as many spaces as we can get in, trying to respect the rules of the roads and what a safety audit would actually allow. And what's quite useful is to compare these together. But before I do that, there is another option which we've been looking at, which is actually looking at reintroducing some 45-degree parking spaces rather than 60 degrees in both locations, both one on Main Street and one on Barrack Street, because we can get up the numbers and we get approximately another 7 spaces if we can achieve that. But as I would say, this option is subject to a safety audit, but we are trying to push this to see if we can get those spaces as much as possible. So when we look at the two together, so the red is the existing, the green is proposed, and I'll just run through very quickly what the differences are. So if we start in the on Main Street, so basically there's parking on the northern side. We have parking on the northern side. We've introduced a new crossing point. A lot of people said this point needs to have somewhere to cross safely, which means we lose a couple of spaces on both sides of the road because of that crossing point. But where we're actually moving further to the west along Main Street, the parking in this instance stays the same. As we opposite Market Street, we've retained the actual hatched area, which the larger vehicles need to get around that corner. It's worth noting that 2 large vehicles meeting at that corner actually one needs to give way to the other, because they're not going to both get rounded at one point. They can't do it today, and there's nothing we can do, just given the tightness of the actual width of Market Street, to make that happen. So we're going to have to rely on what happens today, where vehicles do give way to each other to try to negotiate some of the corners. As we move along Main Street, so basically where currently there's a loading bay, we can have a loading bay. Where there's a whole set of 60-degree parking spaces, we've now made those parallel. And because we have a new crossing point in at this point, we lose the spaces which are actually on the corner, which what the reality is we can't have spaces on corners in any case at junctions moving forward with the new regulations. On the southern side, we've got like-for-like spaces, car parking spaces, and again, we lose a couple that are at the new crossing. Likewise, we lose the bus stop and the other few spaces because we have the other crossing on the southern, or the linking across Barrack Street. As we move along towards the southeast, along Barrack Street, we have like-for-like parking. On the other side of the street, we have a number of parallel parkings, and then we have perpendicular parking. We've then taken those and made them all parallel along the street. We've included disabled bay, loading bay in the location where people would want to see them. And then obviously we've created a new public square, which is a huge asset for the town, and therefore we lose the car parking spaces in there. We can't have spaces within the actual junction environment purely for safety reasons, so all the spaces around that junction are lost. Moving up Pine Street, there are a number of spaces which don't exist today, and we've managed to include that today by actually moving the road alignment and making it narrower. We've actually allowed for a loading bay and a couple of parking spaces which currently aren't in existence. So we're very much trying to work with the existing, accepting what you've got, look at how we're actually going to improve the environment in terms of creating new public space, making it easier to walk around the town centre with better crossing points, and respecting the safety of all users, and that's cars, that's pedestrians, that's cyclists, and really trying to get that balance through that actually is going to make this is a really, really good town centre. So here is a more graphic plan. So with all the parking that we've managed to get in, we do lose a lot of the street trees on the actual roads on both sides where we previously had those in, which is why we've been able to maximize the parking. But we still maintain that the area of public space, which can still have some greening. So the idea is that we get that continuity of greening going up through the town. We do create a really good town square, which is the same size as it previously was in our first diagrams, because we've moved the whole road to the south to allow for the extra parking. And we get greening around the junction as well. We get 3 new crossings, which are token crossings, which means that they're push button and suitable for cyclists to actually use to actually move around as well. We've got a new crossing which goes over the front of Cathedral Street, which we see as very key, picking up pedestrians and school children coming down from the school. And we've got the new crossing just to the west of Market Street, which doesn't exist, and an improved crossing across Market Street itself as well. So all in all, the balance of what we try to create is we try to maximize the parking. We've tried to maintain the idea that the plan still works and that has a benefit, and very importantly, that it still would attract the funding, because we're making significant enough change to actually achieve that. So if we look at the before and after, and just seeing what we've actually got. So before, at the moment, you've got 82, which are majority non-controlled car parking spaces. And what we're looking at re-providing is 41 timed control spaces, the possibility of 7 more if we actually use the 45 degrees, and we can get that through a safety audit. And obviously the difference of those is that we do believe that there are a lot of cars that are sitting there all day long, and we want to move them into the Plots car park. If anything, they're more than a few hours, we don't see any reason why they can't park 3 or 4 minutes walk away and use that car park. So the second point is that there is very little use of the existing car park, and what we'll be doing is making good use of that car park. And we've talked to other people have said that, what are you going to do to the car park to make it safer? And we can look at that. That's something we can certainly do. And we also think that the fact that very few people use it at the moment, when people start to use it, it will feel naturally safer as one of those things. At the moment, there's no need to do it because of the amount of parking in the actual streets. Therefore, we create a reason for it to be used. Currently, there's 2 disabled bays. We're going to create two new ones. We can have more if desired. Likewise, with loading, there's 2 existing, there's 2 after. We can create more. And there's already, from the last meeting we had, there is a request to have a 3rd one. So therefore, we can create a 3rd loading bay, and that takes the place of a car parking space. So you can see there's a balance to be played here of how it all fits together. You have currently 2 non-standard crossing points, and we would say it's difficult to cross the road. The road is very wide. What we'll be doing is narrowing that road. We're creating the 3 new Toucan crossings to make it easier to move around the town centre. And we've also got the other crossing points that we've talked about at Market Street and Cathedral Street, which again just helps that sense of movement. Currently within that core town centre, there's 2 bus bays, and we're taking those out to maximise parking, and we're relocating those bus stops and bays at the Shambles and up in Pine Street next to the cathedral. So we're actually looking at how the bus moves and actually looking at where those bus stops are in the proximity of parking as well. So currently there is no free public space. So if you even wanted to put a little marquee up to do something as an event, you'd have to close a parking space. And what you will be getting is a new multi-purpose town square, which really can work in many different occasions. So this is really a huge difference, and for what we're able to achieve is a far better use of space. There's currently very narrow footpaths, and you're going to get wide, generous footpaths. So all these things is obviously it's a give and take, and what we're trying to do is get that balance. Currently, there's very little greening, and it's going to be very generous greening. And we would have to say that there is a declining town centre with vacancies and a lack of new interest in the town. And what we would hope is that this becomes an aspiring and enhanced town centre. We want to make this a place where businesses want to be, and and shops and offices, and likewise where people want to live. And as we do believe a lot is said when you drive into a town centre, you walk into a town centre, you want to feel inspired. You want to go, oh, this is a great place. We believe there's an element, there's a balance between the function, the aesthetic qualities, the image of it, which all go together to try to make a place better. So there are a number of risks, as always, with every project. So the first one being, as we said, we are going to try to put in those 7 extra spaces, 45-degree parking, and there is a risk that the safety audit says it's unacceptable because you're reversing out into a main road. Even if you can do it today, this is the sort of environment that we're actually faced when we're actually designing new streets and spaces. Likewise, we've really pushed the parking spaces as close as possible to crossing points. Again, that's subject to safety audit. we are probably too close, and they may say they have to be moved out. But again, we'll try to secure those. The carriageway width, so currently it's at 6.4, which is like the sweet spot, if you like, between allowing larger vehicles to pass freely at reduced speeds, and also to promote cycle safety, given the widths of what that actually gives you. It's a recognised width. However, with 45-degree parking, they may say the road has to get wider, so therefore it's slightly at odds. And cycle safety, the subject to a safety audit, parking may be at odds with some of the arrangements. So if we have these 45-degree parking and reverse movements, it could be deemed to be, well, are we creating the right environment? So the other one is not designing a scheme which meets the brief. And therefore, the reality is that there is a significant risk of not achieving the funding. So this funding, which is probably, we would say we're going to be bidding for probably at least 3 million euros. And basically this is the chance. We get one chance, and we go in, and we have to make sure that we are addressing the funding requirements which I've set out their comments at the start. So it is a tricky one to try to say how far can we push that. And then the final one is, which is actually even before we get anywhere near the funding element, which is the bid, which is the lack of local support for the scheme and the Part 8. So we will be going to Part 8 in the weeks that come. We're up against the timeline because of the funding. And if there's no support for it, well, the reality is, unfortunately, that means there is no project, because we don't get the Part 8, we can't go in for the funding. So everything is linked, and we're trying our best to get that balance, and we're trying to take on board all the comments and find that balance to actually create something which we think works. So the next steps. So the first one is to agree a scheme which fulfills both the community's aspirations and the funding requirements, which is what we hope we've strived to achieve. We then need to prepare the Part 8 drawings, which we are in the process of doing. And even since we presented this a week ago, we've all been busy working trying to get more detail to actually put this through a safety audit later this week. So therefore, we are in that process, and we are trying to move forward. From there, we have to put the Part 8 in, and we need to try to achieve we have to achieve a consented Part 8 before we actually get to the deadline for the funding. And we then need to determine and submit the RRDF funding package in line with their guidelines and their timetable. Following on from that, it's not finished, because we can determine and seek other funding packages to deliver the components. So, for example, the little plan here, the red line, which is the whole town centre, may well be the extent of the Part 8. And the blue area could be what we initially go for funding for, which means that there may be active travel funding, there may be roads funding, other fundings that can actually start to deliver some of the other elements. And we always say that delivery of a scheme and the success that brings in terms of its function, its footfall and everything else does actually attract other funding. So therefore, we build a little piece, we do it well, that will attract other funding, and therefore we continue from there. So that brings me to the end of what I'm going to talk about. I'm going to leave the plan on and welcome comments and discussion. Thanks very much. And I'm just going to stop the recording now, because we can now share this recording with other people who couldn't attend tonight, so they can hear exactly the same, the actual why we've got to where we've got to, all the figures, all the information, and allow other people to come forward with their thoughts. Thanks.